There's two really interesting controversies of the last week that I think vividly illustrate a lot of these dynamics. So, as I said at the top of the show, Pat McAfee is a former NFL player who had a great deal of success attracting a huge and young audience through his YouTube program and his other independent media programs that cover the NFL and cover sports. And as a result, ESPN decided that was the kind of audience they were bleeding. ESPN can't attract that audience anymore just by being ESPN. One of the really interesting dynamics is that people are becoming less and less faithful toward and trustworthy in corporate media brands, and instead are placing their faith in specific individuals, including many times, in fact, I would say most times, people who work outside of the corporate media. Obviously, Joe Rogan is the best example of that, but there's so many others. That's the growth of independent media. To me, that's what it means. And Pat McAfee in the sports world was one major example. That's why ESPN threw $85 million at him over, I think, 5 years in order to get him to go to ESPN. And obviously, Pat McAfee's view was, look, I'm making a ton of money independently. I can say whatever I want. So if I'm going to go to ESPN, I'm going to continue to say whatever I want and not be told by corporate bosses at ESPN and Disney, which owns ESPN, what I can and can't say. Part of the show is that he has on once a week the Green Bay quarterback Aaron Rodgers, who has become a very controversial figure during COVID because he was somebody who was very critical of the vaccine. He was skeptical of the vaccine. He was unvaccinated. He's been very critical of Dr. Fauci, and he's basically become somebody who has become infatuated with independent media. I was at an event where I was speaking maybe 6 months ago or a year ago in Miami. He was there. I saw him. He called me over and told me he watches my show, and he's obviously feeding on independent media, and you can see that in a lot of the things he's saying. And so he's gone on Pat McAfee's show, made very controversial comments in the past on ESPN now, not just on Pat McAfee's independent media show. And one of the things he recently did was imply jokingly that Jimmy Kimmel was eager for the Epstein client list not to come out. Because when Aaron Rodgers originally called for the Epstein client list to come out, Jimmy Kimmel, the ultimate voice of the liberal establishment, went on his show on ABC and mocked Aaron Rodgers for that. And that's what Aaron Rodgers was talking about. So Aaron Rodgers went on Pat McAfee's show on ESPN and made these kinds of comments about Jimmy Kimmel, who works for the same company. ABC is the parent company, also owned by Disney. They're both Disney properties, ABC and ESPN. And here's what Aaron Rodgers said on that program.
Mm-hmm.
Bring it up, Foxy or somebody back there.
Seats on it.
Bring up Super Bowl 58.
You'll see it.
The emblem, put it on the screen. And then bring up 57 and 56.
This has something to do with the Epstein list that came out?
Feels like.
That's supposed to be coming out soon.
Look, this guy's been waiting in his wine cellar. Yeah. I've been waiting in my wine cellar for this thing.
A lot of people, including Jimmy Kimmel, are really hoping that doesn't
All right. Obviously, a clip from this particular program was run on Jimmy Kimmel's show whenever Aaron brought up the list, and then Jimmy mocked him for it. Mm-hmm. Aaron has not forgotten about that, but here we are, sitting right in front of that nice bottle of scotch. Mm-hmm. What do you say? I'm waiting to celebrate something.
Oh, yeah.
He's been waiting.
That's the one.
He's been waiting.
Hey, I'll tell you what, if that list comes out, I definitely will be popping some sort of bottle.
Hey, you've been calling for it for a few years now. Anyone else notice this? Oh.
Now, clearly he was referencing jokingly the fact that Jimmy Kimmel mocked Aaron Rodgers previously for calling for the release. He didn't say Jimmy Kimmel was on the client list. He just mocked the fact that Jimmy Kimmel, being the establishment hack that he is, the ultimate establishment hack, thinks it's some sort of conspiracy theory, doesn't seem to want this list to come out. And I don't know if you noticed, but as they broadcast this, the entire time there was this message underneath the program saying, warning this program is a collection of
That's supposed to be coming out.
stooges talking about happenings in the sports world. This doesn't represent ESPN or its bosses. They were obviously being cautious. As a result of all of this, what basically happened was that ESPN, an executive at ESPN, started leaking that the ratings for Pat McAfee's show wasn't very good. Pat McAfee then came out and said that he knows who the executive at ESPN is who's trying to sabotage his show. He called him a rat. And this is the kind of thing that in the past would have immediately gotten someone fired from ESPN. The attitude of ESPN always was, the real power is the ESPN brand. People who work for us are dispensable. They only matter because they work for ESPN. And obviously, Pat McAfee does not think that for good reason. He built up this gigantic audience on his own without ESPN, an audience that ESPN wanted. And so he's essentially saying, I'm not here to abide by the rules of ESPN. I'm going to criticize ESPN when I feel like it because I know that I have all the leverage in the world, because even if they let me go, I have a very successful platform to return to, and ESPN needs me more than I need ESPN. Now, this was something that ended up being discussed on CNN. They brought in their media critic, Oliver Darcy, who, as I pointed out before, seems to have no purpose in life other than to demand that social media platforms and corporations crack down on any kind of dissent from liberal orthodoxy, silence and fire the people who are expressing views that CNN dislikes and the liberal establishment dislikes. And so here was CNN trying to shame Disney into either firing Pat McAfee or not allowing Aaron Rodgers on the air anymore.
Media reporter Oliver Darcy. Oliver, Kimmel says that he would accept an apology from Rodgers. He just spoke, the quarterback, on ESPN. No apology? What did he say?
No apology, Boris. No surprise there either. Kimmel said he wasn't anticipating one. Look, Rodgers said that he understood why Kimmel would be mad if he made the accusation, but insisted he did not make this accusation. He certainly did signal or suggest that Kimmel might be on the supposed, involved in the Epstein documents that were released over the last several days. He was not. What Rodgers did do is he used his time to go on this anti-vaccine rant, assailing Jimmy Kimmel for apparently standing with the medical community and the likes of Dr. Fauci during the pandemic. Why don't we take a look at that?
He gave a platform to one of the biggest spreaders of misinformation during the COVID times, Dr. Fauci. So in my opinion, he ripped me about the vax, and that turns out to be an L on many occasions, because the vax was not safe and effective like we were told that it was in the beginning. There are a lot of injuries now that we've seen related to the vaccine. So in my opinion, you went after me. That's fine. You're a comedian. Go for it. Not offended, but that was an L.
Of course, what Rodgers is saying there is just not true. The medical community would have, of course, say that the vaccine was both safe and effective. And at some point you have...
Do you see the premise embedded in all of this? That whatever the establishment says is the gospel, and because the establishment says it, because Dr. Fauci said it, that means it is true, and anything that deviates from that or questions it is false. It is, I've talked before about how underappreciated it is, how twisted the situation in the United States is, that the leading proponents of censorship are employees of corporate media outlets who call themselves journalists, because journalists traditionally have defended very robust protections for free speech and free press and have never advocated for censorship the way little tattletale journalists like Oliver Darcy and people like him do. People who never break stories, they just kind of whine this way. They're like tattletales. But it's even more remarkable that journalism, which is supposed to be adversarial to establishment power, has, at least in the corporate world, become the ultimate defenders of establishment power. They genuinely believe, even though they're supposed to be skeptical of establishment pronouncements, that establishment pronouncements, by definition, represent the gospel truth. And that not only does anyone who deviate from establishment pronouncements automatically is guilty of disinformation, it should not even be permitted. How can anybody who goes into journalism, who calls themselves a journalist, have this mentality? And yet this is the prevailing mentality in corporate media. And now here's the coup de grace when he starts to demand that Disney put a stop to this and no longer permit it.
I have to wonder when ESPN and its parent company Disney, when they step in here. Disney is at this point one of the only major media companies outside maybe Fox News that would allow this sort of dangerous anti-vaccine medical misinformation to be aired unchecked on their air. And this isn't the first time Rodgers has done this. He goes on these extended rants during his weekly appearance on the Pat McAfee show, which is aired on ESPN. But for now, ESPN and Disney, they're staying silent and not commenting.
That's the grievance. Disney has not intervened and told Pat McAfee that he can no longer permit opinions like this to be aired. This is what the corporate media does. This is what they're designed to do, to enforce establishment orthodoxies, to try and censor any attempts to question it. The exact opposite of what journalism is supposed to be about. Now, even the New York Times today took notice of what I do think is a very important reality here. In their headline, Pat McAfee's on-air slams of ESPN executives show a network power shift. For decades, the biggest star at ESPN was ESPN. That's changing as it transitions from cable dominance to a much less certain streaming future. And it goes on to describe how basically Pat McAfee has an audience that neither ESPN or obviously CNN has anywhere close to having. And this has changed the power dynamics where the individuals that the public trusts are actually the people who the audience places their faith in, no longer the corporate brand. And that is a major indicia of progress, in my view, that these corporate brands have lost the trust and faith of the public to the point where they need to rely on people who the public has decided are actually trustworthy. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.